Well, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is constructing a 1,500-foot wide underwater levee in the Mississippi River.
The Army Corps of Engineers says low water levels on the Mississippi River are expected to last until October. Yesterday, boat traffic was limited on a part of that river that was closed on Monday near Greenville, Mississippi.
The United States government has officially shut down all major operations and navigation along the Mississippi River following the discovery of alarming cracks in the riverbed, an unprecedented move that has sent shockwaves through both regional and national infrastructure systems. The decision came after a series of geological surveys and emergency inspections conducted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the United States Geological Survey revealed severe structural fissures running beneath critical portions of the riverbed. These cracks, hidden for years under sediment and strong currents, have finally come to light, forcing the federal government to act swiftly to prevent a catastrophe of national proportions. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. What initially started as a routine maintenance inspection along a segment near Vicksburg, Mississippi, quickly turned into a crisis situation. A team of hydrologists and engineers detected abnormal seismic readings below the surface, prompting a deeper analysis. Within days, the investigation expanded to cover hundreds of miles of riverbed, and the findings were nothing short of stunning. Cracks, some stretching dozens of feet deep and running laterally for miles, were mapped from northern Louisiana all the way to southern Missouri. Their presence was not only widespread, but also unstable, with the potential to cause riverbank collapses, disrupt flow patterns, and even shift water tables. The Mississippi River is far more than a geographical landmark. It is the economic artery of the United States, responsible for the transportation of agricultural goods, petroleum, coal, chemicals, and countless other commodities. Barges travel its length every day, forming the backbone of inland trade routes that connect the Midwest with the Gulf of Mexico. By shutting down the river, even temporarily, the U.S. government is effectively hitting pause on a vast section of the country's logistics network. Ports have been closed, shipping lanes barricaded, and all civilian and commercial river traffic has ceased under strict federal directive. The silence on the Mississippi is deafening, an unnatural void replacing the usual industrial rhythm of tugboats and churning water. Environmental experts have voiced growing concerns that these riverbed fissures may be part of a larger geological shift occurring beneath the Mississippi basin. The river is naturally dynamic, constantly altering its course over millennia. But these newly discovered cracks do not appear to be natural erosion patterns or remnants of historical river movement. Instead, they resemble fault-like fractures, with sediment layers displaced in a manner suggesting subterranean stress. Some scientists have speculated that underlying tectonic forces may be at work, while others suggest years of dredging, damming, and industrial activity could have contributed to the destabilization of the riverbed. In either case, the implications are profound and unsettling. The Mississippi River supports not only trade, but also drinking water for millions of people, agriculture, irrigation, and countless ecosystems. Any disturbance in its foundation could ripple outward in both literal and metaphorical waves. For instance, shifting sediments could disturb the natural habitats of fish and plant species, triggering biological imbalances. Cracks in the riverbed might alter water flow and depth, causing upstream flooding in some areas while draining others dry. The potential for sinkholes and sudden riverbank collapses near populated communities adds another layer of danger. In towns built closely along the river, some of which have existed for centuries, the fear is palpable. As federal agencies scramble to contain the situation, emergency protocols have gone into effect across multiple states. National Guard units have been deployed to monitor vulnerable areas, while evacuation drills have been quietly tested in towns considered high risk. Civil engineers are erecting temporary barriers and inspecting dams and levees for additional signs of stress. The fear isn't just about what's already been found, but what might be next. The Mississippi is an ancient river, and beneath its waters lie centuries of sediment layers that now may be shifting in unpredictable ways. A cascading failure of the riverbed could result in flooding across miles of farmland, damaging crops at a time when food supply chains are already under strain. Economists warn that the shutdown of the Mississippi River could soon impact everything from grocery prices to global trade. Midwestern farmers rely on the river to move soybeans, corn, and wheat down to Gulf ports for export. With no access to the waterway, these goods now face delays and higher transportation costs, pushing prices higher domestically. The energy sector, too, is vulnerable. Refineries near the river that depend on barge deliveries are reporting supply disruptions, prompting the federal government to consider strategic petroleum reserve releases. From Louisiana to Minnesota, industries are bracing for a domino effect, each sector feeling the stress differently, but no less intensely. In Washington, the political pressure is mounting. Lawmakers from Mississippi River states are demanding answers and expedited solutions. Emergency funding bills are being drafted, while closed-door sessions between the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA continue late into the night. Though partisan tension runs high in Congress, there is bipartisan agreement that the river shutdown is a national emergency. Yet the reality is that the federal government has never faced anything quite like this. Infrastructure built with assumptions of permanence, levees, bridges, water intake systems, is suddenly under threat. The sheer scale of the river, both in length and significance, makes planning and coordination an immense challenge. The cultural weight of the Mississippi also cannot be overlooked. Known as the Father of Waters, it has inspired literature, music, and generations of human settlement along its banks. The communities that line its edges have roots going back to the early days of American history. Now, those same communities find themselves at the epicenter of uncertainty. Residents have reported hearing strange sounds from the river at night, deep groans, gurgles, and sometimes the sound of shifting rock beneath the water. Fishermen speak of changing current patterns, of fish behaving erratically. While anecdotal, these stories contribute to a growing atmosphere of unease, feeding both scientific inquiry and local superstition. Navigation authorities have begun mapping out contingency plans for alternative routes, including rail and highway expansions, but the cost and logistics involved are staggering. The Mississippi's convenience and capacity are unmatched by any other domestic waterway, and no existing infrastructure can replicate its scale. That leaves planners and engineers working on the riverbed itself, conducting sonar surveys, deploying deep penetration radar, and bringing in drilling equipment to extract core samples for analysis. Every hour counts, not only in understanding what caused the cracks, but in assessing the likelihood of escalation. There's also growing discussion in academic circles about whether climate change could be an underlying factor. Shifts in rainfall patterns, extended droughts, and intensified storm systems all influence sediment load, water pressure, and riverbank integrity. Some experts posit that decades of climate stress may have weakened geological features once considered stable. Combined with human interventions like levee construction, channel straightening, and dredging, the river's natural resilience may have been compromised. The Mississippi has always been a living entity responding to natural cycles, but those cycles now intersect with a drastically altered climate and heavily industrialized landscape, creating a volatile mix. Further complicating matters is the international dimension. The Mississippi River is part of the global supply chain, and countries that rely on American exports are watching developments closely. Soybeans destined for China, corn for Latin America, and fuel components for Europe are all now in limbo. Maritime insurers are reevaluating risk levels, and global commodity traders are adjusting prices in response to the river's shutdown. This isn't merely a domestic infrastructure issue. It is a disruption with far-reaching consequences, touching foreign policy, global economics, and energy strategy. Meanwhile, satellite imagery shows subtle shifts in certain bends of the river, prompting new fears that the waterway itself could attempt a reroute, as it has in the distant past. The Army Corps of Engineers has long warned that the Mississippi could one day change its course, particularly near the old river control structure in Louisiana, where it fights to keep the river from jumping westward into the Atchafalaya Basin. The discovery of cracks raises the unsettling possibility that the river could be on the brink of initiating such a transformation. If that happens, cities like Baton Rouge and New Orleans could face economic ruin, losing their lifeline to the river's flow. In Memphis, where the river is both a scenic and economic staple, riverfront developments have been paused indefinitely. Construction cranes stand still, awaiting word from geological experts about the safety of continuing projects. Across the river in Arkansas, water treatment plants are on high alert, testing more frequently for contamination and pressure changes. Local leaders are caught in a balancing act, calming public fears while acknowledging the seriousness of the threat. The longer the shutdown lasts, the more difficult that balance becomes. The Mississippi has faced floods, droughts, and hurricanes, but never before has its very foundation been called into question. The image of a cracked riverbed, a hidden wound running beneath one of the most vital lifelines in the nation, is a haunting one. It speaks to the fragility of systems often taken for granted. Roads can be repaved, bridges reinforced, even coastlines shored up. But when the river itself is compromised, the question becomes more existential. How do you repair something that is, by nature, always in motion? This event may come to redefine how the United States manages its natural infrastructure. For generations, policy has focused on controlling nature, building barriers, redirecting flow, dredging depth. But nature, as this crisis reveals, is not a passive partner in that arrangement. It remembers, it resists, and when pushed too far, it shifts. The Mississippi River is not merely shut down. It is sending a message, one written in sediment and stone, in cracked mud and disrupted current, that no system, no matter how massive, is immune to change. For now, the river waits, silent, motionless in parts, a giant holding its breath. Engineers will continue to scan the depths, leaders will debate and plan, economists will adjust forecasts, and residents will glance uneasily toward the water's edge. But beneath it all, the Mississippi pulses with hidden tension. It is not just a waterway, it is a frontier between stability and uncertainty, and that frontier has shifted. As the Mississippi River lies dormant under the weight of federal shutdown orders, the surrounding regions are beginning to feel the deeper, less immediately visible impact of such a monumental pause. The halt in movement along the river has not only silenced the engines of barge convoys, but also created a vacuum of activity across dozens of industries, municipalities, and ecosystems that depend on the river's daily rhythm. Yet, beyond the mechanical and economic standstill, there is an emerging awareness of how intricately society is tied to this body of water, not just functionally, but culturally, psychologically, and even spiritually. The ripple effects of the shutdown extend into the heart of rural America, where small farming towns are now grappling with decisions that haven't been faced in living memory. Grain silos are filling faster than anticipated, forcing producers to consider whether they can store their crops or will need to destroy or donate excess yields. Livestock operations, which rely on grain transport and water access, are facing bottlenecks. In some regions, there are even murmurs of potential livestock culling, not because of disease or cost of feed, but simply due to a lack of movement and space. When transportation halts, everything from supply chains to daily feeding schedules is thrown into chaos. Educational institutions in river-adjacent cities and towns are also adjusting to this crisis in unusual ways. Some school districts have incorporated temporary environmental science units into their curriculum, using the event as a real-time case study of earth sciences, environmental policy, and disaster management. In higher education, universities are holding emergency conferences and dispatching research teams to gather data while the river remains closed. For students and faculty in fields like geology, hydrology, and civil engineering, the Mississippi shutdown has become an unplanned but invaluable living laboratory, albeit one born of a potential disaster. Meanwhile, the aviation and drone sectors are being leveraged in ways never before considered essential in domestic river monitoring. With traditional navigation and survey vessels out of commission, aerial surveillance has become the backbone of tracking subtle shifts in the river's structure. Drones are being deployed in high numbers to capture topographic changes in real time, providing three-dimensional imaging of new fractures, water levels, and land deformations. Companies specializing in remote sensing are now critical partners to federal and state agencies, their role no longer confined to wildfires or wartime reconnaissance, but urgently repurposed to keep a watchful eye on the slow tectonic drama unfolding below the surface of America's greatest river. The social fabric of river towns is also beginning to wear thin under the pressure of uncertainty. Mental health professionals are reporting increased levels of anxiety and depressive symptoms in communities closely tied to the river. For many, the Mississippi is not just a means of income, but an omnipresent feature of life, a symbol of continuity and a source of generational pride. With it suddenly rendered off-limits, that sense of identity has been disrupted. Group therapy sessions, community forums, and support circles are being organized around the shared experience of waiting for answers, a collective limbo that binds people even as it frays their patience. Churches and local spiritual leaders have stepped into a more visible role during this time, hosting prayer vigils, organizing community meals, and framing the event as a trial that must be faced with unity. Though secular agencies lead the scientific and logistical response, faith communities are becoming de facto emotional first responders. In towns like Natchez, Greenville, and Hannibal, the river has always held a dual role, as both a real and metaphorical force, feeding crops and feeding the soul. Now, with its stillness, there is a spiritual silence to accompany the physical one. The media's role in framing the crisis has also come under scrutiny. While initial coverage focused on the shutdown's novelty and scale, attention has shifted toward the human consequences. Documentarians and investigative journalists are embedding in affected towns, attempting to capture the subtleties of this disruption. Stories are emerging not just from city halls and command centers, but from gas station clerks, retired barge captains, school teachers, and riverfront artists. The shutdown, while rooted in geology, is becoming a narrative about people and their uneasy relationship with natural forces far beyond their control. Insurance companies, often the quiet undercurrents of any disaster, have begun reassessing policies across multiple industries. River-based businesses, everything from shipping firms to tourism operators, are discovering clauses they never thought would be triggered. Payouts are slow and heavily conditional, with some insurers waiting for formal declarations of long-term damage. Others are requesting geological assessments before disbursing funds. Legal disputes are simmering in the background as firms and municipalities alike seek restitution for losses caused by the federal shutdown. Entire legal teams are being mobilized to interpret vague contract language suddenly thrust into relevance. Simultaneously, emergency innovation has become a hallmark of this evolving situation. Startups and established corporations alike are pivoting to provide temporary solutions to movement and monitoring. From portable sonar arrays to modular sediment stabilizers, the crisis has ignited a wave of technological experimentation. Some engineers are exploring riverbed stabilization through synthetic layering, while others are examining whether temporary channel redirection might be possible to relieve geological stress. These ideas, once theoretical, are now being tested in real time. Innovation, born out of necessity, is moving faster than bureaucracy can typically allow. The U.S. military has also become increasingly involved, not merely in a supportive logistics role, but as a proactive partner in scenario planning. Joint exercises between the Army Corps of Engineers and National Guard engineering units are focusing on worst-case outcomes: complete river course deviation, levee collapses, or the potential for cascading failures across tributary systems. Advanced wargaming simulations are being run to understand what would happen if the Mississippi split or diverted entirely. These scenarios, while extreme, are being taken seriously, because geological change is indifferent to historical precedent. As this massive waterway remains still, surrounding ecosystems are undergoing quiet but significant transformations. Aquatic life, accustomed to the river's constant churn, is experiencing changes in feeding and migration patterns. Some fish populations are congregating in unusual places, while others appear to be in decline due to reduced oxygen levels and stagnant water conditions. Bird species that follow the river's path during seasonal migrations are appearing off schedule or in unexpected locations. Botanists have noted accelerated erosion in some areas and unnatural sediment deposits in others, symptoms of a river no longer in balance with itself. Tribal nations with ancestral ties to the Mississippi have also voiced concern. For many indigenous groups, the river holds sacred significance as a life-giving force, deeply woven into oral histories and cultural practices. Representatives from multiple nations have requested inclusion in federal discussions, citing both their sovereign rights and centuries of lived knowledge regarding the river's behavior. Their perspectives, often marginalized in contemporary infrastructure planning, are now being sought as officials look for guidance that spans beyond the technological. In some circles, a broader philosophical conversation is unfolding about the need to see the river not as a resource to control, but as a living entity that demands respect and reciprocity. The international scientific community is watching the Mississippi shutdown with focused attention. Researchers from Europe, Asia, and South America have expressed interest in collaboration, offering comparative data from their own major rivers such as the Amazon, Danube, and Yangtze. What's happening in the United States may provide insight into similar vulnerabilities in other global waterways. Cross-border coalitions of scientists are beginning to form, unified by the understanding that in a time of accelerating environmental change, no river operates in isolation. Global climate systems, tectonic pressures, and human infrastructure practices intersect in complex, often unpredictable ways. The Mississippi, in its forced silence, has become a symbol of all that lies beneath the surface, both literally and metaphorically. It has laid bare the fragility of systems built on assumptions of permanence. It has exposed the fault lines not just in the earth, but in logistics, governance, and belief. And it has reminded the nation that nature, when pushed, will find its own way to respond. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Mississippi shutting down after cracks in riverbed? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.